manner in which you can join our proceedings. We'd like to welcome you all. And we've got a few items today for considerations. So we will go straight on to the matters. The first matter, before we do, just to remind members and colleagues that if you could just kindly complete the declaration of interest form, which is published on the board pad, and return it to Mr. Dlamini. That applies to both members of staff and the members of the regulator, of the energy regulator. Okay, with that, then can we go straight to item number 6? We noticed that there were orders that were these items were actually crossed around. 6 was reported as 7 and 7 was reported as 6, but that has now been corrected. Mr. Mavuso, can I hand it over to you for introduction and to indicate who's going to present? Mr. Mavuso, you are on the call.
Good morning, Chairperson, members and colleagues. Mr. Mavuso had asked Mr. Siamela to lead the presenters. If Mr. Siamela is around, he may do so with the permission.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shozi.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. And then I've got flu, and it's some time that I have it. I think all the presenters, they should just introduce themselves, and then as per the agenda item, if I may request that, Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shozi. This belongs to your team, so perhaps you may want to say a few words.
Okay, no problem, Chairperson. The agenda item number 6 will be presented by Mr. Madome Hopa. It's a submission around the power quality exemption. It's your typical exemption, nothing new. I think it's an extension, but Mr. Hopa will give reasons for this extension and for non-compliance. Over to you, Mr. Hopa.
Thank you. Mr. Siamela, if you can kindly lower your hand. Mr. Hopa.
Okay. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Shozi. Good morning to the colleagues and members. Item number 6, the purpose of the submission is to request the Electricity Subcommittee to approve the temporary exemption of Kagnas and Pedagral wind farms. The committee has authority to approve the exemption from this grid code. Both wind farms are from bid window 4. Bid window 4, so they have achieved their COD in October and September 2020 respectively. So they are sort of a new exemption on the power quality. So what power quality states is that what the clause states is that the voltage and the quality distortion levels as emitted by the RPP to the grid may not exceed some apportion limit, and those limits are set by the relevant NSP. So that's the reason for their non-compliances. Pedagral has about 2 harmonic emissions exceeded, and Kagnas has about 5 harmonic emissions exceeded. So the remedial actions of both plants, since they are similar in type and they also belong to the same manufacturers, is that they will upgrade their firmware in order to mitigate this harmonic excision. And Annexure A has the project plan, and also Annexure B and C has the NSP support letter for Kagnas and as well as for Pedagral. And the reason for us wanting the full compliance of both wind farms on the grid is that they will improve the reduction of unnecessary energy loss and secure reliability of power supply, and also provide the maximum utilization of installed capacity to the grid. So with that being said, the recommendations are on page 7 of 13, and that is to recommend the ELS to approve these temporary exemptions. And there's a table outlined on page 7 as well, table number 3, and also with the conditions that are set on 14.12 are also recommended. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kopa. Members, you've got the presentation before us. If you can, by show of hands, perhaps raise your hand if you have any questions for the presenter or comments. If you're seeking any clarifications, perhaps. Going once, going twice. Mr. Popper, I guess it is very clear, and the request is also clear. So members, can I then take you to the decision that is sought? That is on page 7, page 79 of 362. That is it's on page 7 and it's paragraph 14. I won't actually read the actual content. It's pretty clear. So if by show of hands, members, if we can indicate if we support the recommendation that is sought or the decision that is required of us. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Madam Pungose. Thank you, Madam Maseti. I also support. Mr. Kopa, you've got your decision. Can we then move straight now to item number 7? Is that Mr. Kalakan who's presenting that?
That is correct, Chairperson. Ms. Kalakan will take us through on its submission from Matimba, where Matimba is seeking exemption not to conduct islanding test, but she will take the members through why they don't feel they are seeking this exemption. Over to you, Ms. Rakhalakan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shozi, and thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, colleagues and members. So the purpose of this submission is to request that the Electricity Subcommittee approve a temporary exemption extension for Matimba Power Stations, units 1 to 5 of Matimba Power Station from complying with clause 3.1.22 of the Transmission Network Code. So Matimba currently has an exemption for these units that will expire in December 2022. So the Electricity Subcommittee is delegated as per clause 1.7 of the Electricity Delegation Matrix to approve this exemption or exemptions from the South African Grid Code. So in terms of the clause requirement, the clause requires that units that do not have the capability to self-start, they must be able to island themselves from the system or from the transmission system. So unit islanding is the ability of a generation unit to disconnect itself from the system in the event of a network instability or a network event. So the unit must be able to control all parameters within itself and disconnect from the system, but still be able to supply its own auxiliary loads and be able to reconnect back into the system once the system has stabilized. So the reason for non-compliance for these units at Matimba is that after a number of inspections that were done on the units over a number of years, it was discovered that the blades, they call them last stage turbine blades, they were found to have cracks on them, and these cracks are due to a design defect. And so the concern is that if these tests for unit islanding are performed on these units, they might actually worsen the state of these blades. So the concern is that these blades will, the cracks on the blades will propagate. But in terms of the units being able to perform unit islanding, so the units can perform islanding. Is just the request is that for them to be exempt from being tested for this functionality. So this functionality is usually tested every 6 years or at when it's initially being commissioned. In terms of the remedial action, so there is a plan in place for these blades to be replaced with a new design, and the reason that it has taken long for the project to be completed, it was due to financial constraints. But in terms of what the original equipment manufacturer suggested was that the design of these blades needs to be changed in order to mitigate against the cracks. And once these the projects are complete, then the test will be performed on the machines, as per the outage schedule, the current outage schedule for the plant. So in terms of the recommendations, they are on page 6. So it is recommended that the Electricity Subcommittee approve the extension of this temporary exemption as outlined in table 2, and also approve the conditions as recommended by the GCAC, which are also on page 6, item 14.2. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Madam Kalagana. Members, you've got the presentation before us. Well explained, I think. It's assumed as read also, but this, I think the presentation was captured the essential elements. I'm not sure by show of hands, members, if you've got any questions to the presenter. Thank you, Madam Assetti. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Chairperson. And thank you for the presentation. I just want to check one or two things. The first one is the timing of the islanding of this unit. Is it something that is going to be done consistently? I see somewhere in the submission we saying that it will be a routine islanding, and also there is there's mention that there will also be a reconnection to the transmission network. So those are the two things that I just wanted to understand, at least for my benefit, to understand what is being sought. So is this island, does it mean that the unit will at all times be sort of functioning independent of the entire system or the network, or are there times when it will be reconnected back onto the transmission network? I just want to understand how is it going to work so that the exemption on the basis of islanding, we should be able to understand how it's going to work, if that can be clarified. And then I think it's also important that we understand the root cause of the problem on these blades, or that causes these blades to crack. Is it specifically the design? I mean, it can't just be the design. Surely there must have been something that happened. How can the design be done wrongly? So if one can just give us, some clarity there. And then thirdly, at what point will this problem be fixed? And so that we can understand also, financial implications, of which financial implications I assume will be felt on the tariff, on maintenance cost of the tariffs. And so if we can just understand that aspect, at what point will such financial implications be felt on the tariffs that the public and consumers will be required to pay? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Assetti. Mr. Mkhize.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks to the presenter. I'd just like to get some clarity here. When one looks at the root cause being put forth, is one of a design flaw on the pressure button. And then if you've got that design flaw, then you've got the cracks that are now being propagated further, which is also then, because I just want to check, then does it mean that they are being propagated because of the wear and tear as they are getting used? In other words, it remains the root cause. This design flaw remains the root cause. There is no other flaw that is causing the propagation of the cracks other than just wear and tear as they are being used. I just want to get that clear, because if you go to in terms of the remedial action, there's an issue of now having a new design for the last blade, whether that is just to enhance it further, but the root cause has been identified and dealt with as such. And then the other thing is that you're talking of the destructive testing. I just want to get the nature, because sometimes when you're talking of in the materials engineering, when you're talking of destructive tests, it may mean that it is of a nature that it literally destroys the plate. I just want to get that term as to why then have it destructive. And then also, if it will help to understand the life of these plates, because I was thinking when I was reading through, I was thinking that you are going to test the last ones, to make it just more of a last kick of a dying horse, rather than to get new ones and then to test on those, because you are saying that the islanding is possible. The challenge is to test it, not that it cannot island. So now I think it would also have helped if you had indicated the frequency of this, the need for islanding, that based on maybe history, if there's a need for that, so that one can see that they can have an appreciation of the risk and how the risk can be mitigated. So I would appreciate that you clarify that in terms of the frequency of such a characteristic for Matimba or some other power station that has been required in the past, and then which then will show the risk and the mitigation thereof. And I also think that is going to be important to also in the background, just to assist them by indicating which parties are represented in the GCAC, noting the changes that are taking place with regard to the electricity industry. So for me, I'm not averse to supporting this, but I just need that clarity. And if you look, this was in 2008 that you granted the first one was granted. When last was a successful test done? That also would kind of help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Madam Pumasa.
Thank you, Chairperson. I've got, thanks Tim for the presentation. I've got, I think it's about 3 questions for the team. I wanted to find out the remedial action that they intend to put in place. By when is it anticipated that it will be completed by? And the timeline of the islanding exemption, it will be applicable until when? Do we have a standing timeline, or it will be assessed as we go along with the remedial action to check when that will be finalized and thus ready to carry on with the islanding exercise? And also just to find out what are the risks associated with the fact that we're not conducting the islanding, because it has a role to play, to check the quality or the ability of the system to provide a service. So if we're not conducting these islanding exercises due to the risk associated there with the cracks, as per the requirement, how are we then able to assess whether the system can still provide the service or not? How can we check on the reliability of the system? And also, I wanted to know. Oh, okay. I think this I've partly covered this one, because I was saying obviously the islanding exercise is to identify or fulfill a particular capability. Without us conducting the islanding, therefore we can never be certain to know how much reliability of service can still be provided, or what is the state of the network. So how do we guard against it? What are the risks associated therewith? I think, I think I'm covered. Thanks, Chair. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Madam Mose. Thank you, members, for your questions. Over to you, Madam Bakalakane.
Yes, okay, no, thank you. I will attempt to answer the questions, and maybe the ones that I don't manage to cover, I'll ask whoever on the team to assist. So the first question was in terms of, from Ms. Masetti, in terms of these routine tests, how long, I guess the question is how often are they done, and how long is the unit of the system such that it will then be ready to be connected back to the to the transmission system. So in terms of how the tests are conducted, so under normal circumstances, the units are connected onto the system and operating as usual. But if there is a system event, let's say a disturbance on the system, it could be like maybe a major fault. So the system operator basically will initiate a request for a particular unit to disconnect itself from the system, and it's supposed to actually be able to stay off the system until the event has been cleared. And when they test it in such a way that it can remove itself from the system from a minimum, I think, of 20 minutes and up to a period of 2 hours, supplying its own local load, and then go back onto the system. But the tests themselves are only done every 6 years. So it's initially when the units are coming online at COD, or then after every 6 years, a unit has to be tested to check if it can actually perform this function. So in terms of the frequency, so that's every 6 years. So unless if there isn't any system event, then there will not be a need for these units to island. And then so in terms of the reconnection onto the system, it's immediately when the event is cleared or as per instruction from the system operator. So it depends on how long it takes to clear whatever event that was taking place. And I think those were the two questions from Ms. Masetti, in terms of the routine itself, and also how long it stays off the grid before it can come back. And so there was also a question on when the actual financial, so if there are any financial implications for, I guess, the replacement of these blades, and if this will be felt by customers. So in the way I understand it is that the costs to correct this defect or to replace the blades would have basically formed part of the costs that are approved through the MYPD or through the licensee's tariff application for a particular financial year, because as you could have seen from in terms of the project or how they plan on implementing, so it will not be a 1 year type of a project. So on that year, or on that specific year where they plan to replace specific blades, so the approval of funds for that replacement then will form part of what the licensee would have applied for in their tariff application. So it is in a way then a cost that will be passed through as part of the costs that are approved every year for the licensee to do maintenance on their systems. And I think I can move on to Mr. Mkhize's questions.
There was a question, I think, similar to Mr. Mkhize's, about the cause of the problem.
the pressure, in terms of what is it that is actually causing these cracks. So the cause of the problem is identified as a design defect, because the cracks were actually identified much earlier on in terms of when the units had come online. So the issue that they've specified there is that there's a pressure button. I think when the pressure of the steam that is being released to hit the turbine, there's a button that where this pressure basically is applied. So this specific button, they have indicated that it is defective, and as a result, then it's causing the blades to crack. So it is identified as something that was picked up in the actual design of the blades themselves. Hence, a proposal from the manufacturer to change the design of the blades to a different design. They call it a snubber blade, the recent one that they're proposing. So from Mr. Mkiza's question, is it wear and tear as they are being used or to be enhanced further? I think I've just touched on that one a little bit to say it's not necessarily as a result of normal wear and tear on this specific blades at this specific station. It was the root cause was identified to be caused by a problem in the actual design of the blades themselves. And the other question was what is meant by these these tests being destructive? Destructive, does it mean that it so does it mean that it destroys? Okay, I didn't capture that correctly, but as in like when we talk about destructive, sometimes it might mean that when you take the test, then it will completely destroy the item or the equipment that is being tested. So in this case, what is meant by this is that for the unit to island, there are high stresses that are basically exposed onto the equipment, because the unit might be running at maybe full capacity, and basically the unit within itself, it must automatically control all other parameters within itself, whether it's pressure and maybe slowing down to reduce output and only produce enough to be able to supply the local load. So it's just in the nature of, so basically it's not necessarily even just the test itself being putting a lot of stresses on the equipment, the test islanding in itself, because for them to test for system islanding, the unit has to physically island from the system. So islanding in itself, it requires the unit to control all parameters to be able to disconnect from the system. And what is being said is that part of automatic control, there's high stresses that are exposed on the equipment that makes it to be destructive in nature. So it's something that they wouldn't want to do. So we don't island unless we really have to. And in terms of the frequency okay.
Before you continue, I think there's a follow-up question from Mr. Mkiza on that question. Mr. Mkiza?
Thanks. I think, Ms. Han, it will help if you for me, with Mr. Shows working together to rephrase, especially the reasons for non-compliance, that paragraph. Because, for example, if you're saying that this was due to a design flaw on the pressure button, and then which has since been changed. If it's been changed, then why do the cracks then continue to propagate? Why then do you have to change the design of the last plate that you put as a remedial action? So the root cause and the remedial action, they must talk to each other, as well as the the issue of the flow to say now you still have got these cracks because you continue to use it because there's no reason that it then comes in to say to talk to the propagation of the cracks. Because I was separating the formation of the cracks and the propagation of the cracks. And two, I think just use another word instead of destructive, because when you've got destructive testing, it's very different than when you've got a test that is very intense, you know, with a lot of pressure. Those are not necessarily the same. So just use the correct words there, and then be able to demonstrate that in terms of the risk, to say that how often this would normally happen, and in between the time, because you said the unit is still, I mean, the plant can still island, but the problem is just you don't have to do the testing. So I just want to, if you clarify that, I don't see a reason why I would not grant this exemption, but it's how you've phrased issue. I mean, your document. In other words, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Shoza, do you want to assist perhaps Mr. Kalagan a little bit in terms of whether this is, because I note the issue around the button, but the main thing here, it's clear that it's a material selection, it's a material selections that actually allow for stress corrosion cracking and things like that on the blades. Anybody who may want to add and assist? I see, Buiswa, you've got a point on the chat. Do you want to talk to that?
Okay. I think because and I think not being a material person per se, but the establishment of the cracks already then create a situation where those blades are fragile, and so the normal operation of ramping up and down will then worsen that already cracked blade, and so the islanding exercise brings in additional strain, because you are effectively having to ramp down from whatever load you are in. Maybe you're at 80% and you must ramp all the way down to just auxiliary power, and so that becomes strenuous. And so the exemption is effectively saying that let's not necessarily put these components under undue stress, because we know that when the islanding is needed, it will island, but let's not exacerbate an already faulty blade in terms of that. So it's just the fact that there's already an established crack that just gets worsened by the normal operation, and then we don't want to exacerbate that with additional strain.
Thank you for that additional explanation. I guess in terms of materials engineering, the issue here is about if you select a particular different materials react differently in terms of a stressful environment. Some materials are better suited to be able to take the stress, which the stress comes from both temperature and pressures. But other type of materials are not as able to actually take the stress. So that's the first one. So that's where I would assume the design fault came from in terms of the selection of the material, which perhaps was not necessary, is not always the case with the other blades. Now, the issue though is that if a plant is running consistently at steady state, if it's running at steady state, you don't subject it to that type of destructive nature of the test itself, which I guess the issue of the word destructive as opposed to non-destructive testing, which is non-intrusive, perhaps though you could find a better word, Madam, non-intrusive or whatever. The issue here is what you are saying is that the test itself, as from what you are indicating, the stress induces additional stresses that would not come from normal operation. So if the plant is running at steady state, it runs consistently, but the minute you change something, you introduce additional stresses, and hence it leads to a plant being subject to all of the failures that might result. So that's what I understood. So that's why I would say it's a design fault on the blades rather than on that button that you've indicated. And the design fault would be the selection of materials that were used to actually make the blade. Would that assist, Mr. Kalkan?
Yeah. Yes, no, that does assist. Thank you for that. I actually wanted to. I see where the confusion comes as in the way that I have phrased it. But yes, so the button itself was changed, but the problem did not go away. So the button was changed and the problem did not go away. So then that's how they've discovered then that the issue is actually with the blade itself, the whole design of the blade. Hence now they are being removed and they will be replaced with new blades that have a different design altogether. So in terms of the material that is being used and some of the things that you've mentioned, but I do acknowledge that in how it's phrased, it does cause confusion.
Okay, thank you, Madam. If we can, if we can push on.
Okay. Yes, I think so. There was a question on in terms of frequency of islanding based on history. So there has been a number of successful islanding that took place at the station. If I could just, I was trying to find the record. So they have. They provided a number of instances where, let's say, Unit 6 islanded successfully in 2014, and actually also in 2020 it islanded successfully, but it did not maybe reconnect back to the system, but it was not due to the unit itself. There's a breaker that failed during that test, and also Unit 1 in 2017. So there has been instances where the units at the station were requested to island and they managed to island successfully. So I'm going to link that with the question that Ms. Mpongo asked to say, basically now that they are requesting an exemption not to test. So how do we know that the units themselves can island? So in the absence of these tests, so I guess the risk now is that we just have to depend on the previous, in terms of history, the previous instances where these units were requested to island and they were then able to island. So we do have a record of those. And I think another question from Ms. Mpongo was then, in terms of the timelines, to say, when will they complete, when will they be able to comply or complete the changes and be able to test? I think the exemption is requested up until December 2029. So, and they aligned their schedule in terms of the replacement of these blades. They've aligned it with their outage schedules. I know the first ones will be done in 2024, if I'm not mistaken. And there was also a question with regards to the parties that are represented at the GCAC, I think from Mr. Mkize. It's so in terms of the industry stakeholders, we basically have a representation from most of the participants in the industry. Municipalities are represented, IPPs are represented, ESCOM transmission, distribution and generation system operator as well, and also even the energy intensive, high energy intensive users. So in terms of the constitution, I think it's what in terms of the governance, they do try to have all participants in the industry be represented at the GCAC. I'll stop there, Chairperson, and if I've missed any of the questions, I'll ask the colleagues to assist.
Okay, before they do, I see Madam Massetti has a follow-up, and also Madam Pungose. Let's start with you, Madam Massetti.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, on the issue of financial implications, I think we should have at least expanded there so that the members of the regulator can have a better appreciation of what could be the financial implications for consumers or ratepayers as a result of any potential replacement of the design, and also any possible increases on the maintenance of the already cracked blades in the way that they are supposed to be managed before there are any replacements of the designs. So those the costs arising from those are supposed to be clarified as to who will then pay for those costs. Especially because if we're talking about issues of the design for these projects and for independent producers, in the same way that there's a lot of outcry with regards to design defects, even for other power stations such as Medupi and Kusile, and the financial implications on consumers, even on this one. When we talk about those issues, it is important that we talk about, at least the regulator does have a better sense of the implications, cost implications on consumers. So with these kind of projects, I mean, the developers of these projects, are they not supposed to take the risk, or how is the risk apportioned when it comes to the design defects? That becomes very important for us, at least from the viewpoint of any financial implications, and because they will have experts that develop these projects. So if there are design problems that cause financial implications, how will that be handled, and how are the risks apportioned in terms of the cost? So I would like to understand that. But that issue of financial implication does not end there. We do know that in most cases, when we consider revenue applications, whether it's a new application altogether or even through regulatory clearing accounts, we come across costs pertaining to deemed energy payments. And how will that be dealt with? It's not stated here in the submission. All that is stated is that when it comes to deemed energy payments, they will not be allowed. But there is no tool that is stated here to say that when it comes to all of these exemptions that may have potential deemed energy payments that might be claimed, this is the measure that the energy regulator will apply, and also just for the team to monitor and be able to pick up those things whenever we have applications, so that we don't reimburse for cost or for energy that was not delivered. So I just wanted to check that, Chairperson, if the colleagues can respond to that. Thank you so much. Lastly, Chair, why is it that the decision talks to an extension? Aren't we just required to approve temporary exemption for islanding, as opposed to, say, a temporary exemption extension? I don't understand what that means. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Your follow-up, Madam Pungose? Mr. Shozi, you will assist with the response later. Thanks. Madam Pungose?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think either Madam Vuis or Madam Dock has responded that how they assess the state of the unit and its reliability in terms of the service it can provide. They rely on historical islanding exercises, to ascertain that state. But what I'm not sure of, how reliable are those historical islanding? Because if I'm not mistaken, from the report, it does appear that the last islanding on Matimba was conducted back in 2008, and that's 14 years ago. Clearly, it means we don't really know the state of that unit. And are we not creating a much bigger risk to the network because we don't know the state of the unit, how much it can still function, and how much we can still rely on without having conducted those islanding exercises in the whole of 14 years? And really, the remedial action that needed to be put in place, does it take this long for about 14 years without it being completed? If that is the case, I think it's a real concern that we need to guard against. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam. I see Mr. Nkiza's hand went up and went down. Mr. Shozi, as you assist with the responses, please I'd like us to just remind members that this particular one here, this request is, the issue here is about the testing on the ability to island. Not that it is not able to island, but the frequency of the testing that needs to be done, because of the fear that the more you do the test, the more you subject these already cracked blades to more stress, and therefore would result in would potentially result in the plant being affected negatively. Please stress that. That's number two. And I think also the issue that then come out of this is the issue of financial implications. That, remember, what you are here for is not necessarily to actually look at the problems in Matimba and with the problems in Matimba in terms of the blades, but we are here to say it's an exemption from the testing in terms of the grid code, and therefore the issues of financing don't necessarily come into this one. But maybe you can better explain this. I think that we may have raised, yes, there are issues in terms of the tariff in respect of the performance of Matimba and everything that associated with it. However, what we are here for is the exemption from the grid code in terms of testing. So if we can explain that better, I think Mr. Shozi, please.
I think there's no other way to explain it the way you have done, Mr. Committee, because what I wanted to say is the committee, the GCA itself, GCAC, it advises on technical matters mostly, not on financial matters. So we looked this application on the technical ability. What is it that is requested by Matimba? Is not at this stage, is we are allowing Matimba not to go for that routine test. It's got no financial implication at this stage. Financial implication will only come when the blades are being replaced. And then that will be treated in how ESCOM does the procurement, and it's factored in their revenue application. Around the issue of deemed energy payment, again, this scenario is different. The power station itself is contracted to provide ancillary service, so they get paid for providing this service. So this is why we are not talking about the deemed energy payment. So they will be treated under the contract of ancillary service. We are saying this is an extension of an extension because the extension has not lapsed. We want to put this extension on the current or existing exemption that was granted. So we are extending the existing extension. Around the risk, if we don't test this plant, how do you know it will be able to island? Unfortunately, when it's called upon to island, the other plants that are not contracted to island, they trip or they either disconnect from the network. So if Matimba is unable to island when it's being called upon to island, the next option is to trip, because they cannot keep on injecting active power on the network that has got fault. So we cannot then put more power on the faulty network. So they'll have to disconnect. So that is how we'll manage the situation if they are unable to island. But what we have just said, Mr. Gumede, this submission is pure on technical capability of the plant, and it's got no financial implication at this stage. Thanks.
Thank you. I saw Madam Aseti's hand shot up and then went down again. I don't know, ma'am. We've been on this for 35 minutes. I'd like to bring it to a close at some point, but please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I'm well aware that this has to do with the technical operations of the system. I'm very much aware of it. But when the problem arises and it due to these exemptions and technical operations, if things are not working very well like they're happening here, there will be financial implications in the same way as I had given the example earlier on regarding the design defects in other power stations, which actually resulted in the increase of operational expenses because there was a lot of water that had to be used, for mid-to-P and all of that. So even with this one, there will be cost implications. It is not to say that simply because it's a technical issue and therefore as a result of that technical issue that needs to be fixed, that there will be no cost that arises from the technical issue. So it is from that perspective that I'm asking about financial implications. And also the issues of deemed payment, they were also mentioned here, but there were no measures that were indicated. So it all comes from the submission that is that we were given, and we prepared on the basis of the issues mentioned on the submission. If those issues were irrelevant, they should not have been part of the submission that is brought to us. So we ask on the basis of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam. Noted. Colleagues, I think it is noted sometimes. I think we actually become we become our own enemies in terms of delivery, because always simply asking, all I think that the submission is asking for here is that in terms of islanding, the plant may island as indicated, I think, on the chat, but the issue is about testing. And all that the submission is here for is to ask that this, because of the fear that frequent testing, because of the design fault of the blades, frequent testing may result in a premature failure of the plant, that the issue here is that this plant cannot be exempted until those faults have been fixed. And yes, in the fixing of the plants, there will be cost implication. And there are risks associated with that, as highlighted by Madam Pungose. The question is, when there's a need to actually island, can we be assured that these plants can successfully island? And I think, as indicated on the chat, yes, the plant has actually islanded on the times when it has been called to do that. And Mr. Shozi has indicated that even if it doesn't island, it will then trip. So to actually protect the system. But what we are here for is just the testing side. And we're justifying why it cannot be tested. And so members, if you can just allow, the team has noted the issues you've raised with the submission. I think even the use of words like destructive testing as raised by Mr. Nkize, we need to find better words in terms of, but in terms of the request itself, members, the request which is captured under paragraph 14 is really just to say, instead of this plant, of this power station being tested every 6 years, as should be tested because of the fear that it might fail, where they are requesting for an exemption on the testing based on the conditions that are explicitly laid out on paragraph 14.2. So that is what is being asked for, members, noting all of the clear instruction to the team in terms of presenting of similar requests in the future. So members, can I direct you to that and say by show of hands whether you'd be in a position to actually approve the recommendations as laid out in section 14, 1 and 2. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I assume you are voting, Mr. Mkhize?
I'm voting subject to the rephrasing as
The
put forth.
rephrasing. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Noted, Madam Pungose, and noted, Madam Massetti. I also support. So, Madam Rapalagan, you've got your decision, but please note the concerns raised by members, at least in terms of the wording, and maybe the bringing into although well meant, but if you bring them into these submissions, they raise questions around, therefore, how is this going to be funded? What is the cost implication? Who's going to carry this? Should this not be carried by the OEM and so forth and so forth? Which I don't think was the intention of this submission, but because you raised it, if you do raise things like that, because you want to make this document a better read, it might then be important to then include those issues as raised by members. Thank you, members, for that. Then we can move off step off this one and go to item 8. Who's presenting this one? You can go ahead, please.
Chairperson, item 8 and 9 will be presented by Mr. Zoom.
Thank you. Manzin, please proceed, sir.
Good morning, Chair, members and colleagues. The purpose of the submission in terms of item number 8 is to request the Electricity Subcommittee to approve the temporary exemption for Norport for Konkosi's Solar 2 PV from complying with clause 7.2 and 7.32 of the Renewable Power Plan Code, and also to approve the temporary exemption of Norport Wind Farm from complying with clause 13.2 of the RPP Code. This committee is duly delegated as per clause 1.8 to approve this type of temporary exemption. I will start with Konkosi's 2 solar PV in terms of the motivation on page 3. Basically, this temporary exemption is about active and reactive power capability. Active power, let me just first explain what we mean by active power. Active power is the real voltage that you measure in terms of watts or kilowatts, but the reactive power is the actual type of power that ramps up or ramps down to make the generators to generate, to make the motors to rotate, and the transformer to transform. Then with regards to that, these plants must provide grid support by providing this reactive power so that the grid can be stable. Initially, the energy regulator did grant a temporary exemption on Konkosi's 2 that since has been expires on the 31st of March 2022. Reason being that out of 4 aspects of section 7.3, at that time they only managed to comply with 2 aspects, and then they didn't comply with other 2 aspects. So during the testing, it was found that there were some technical glitches on some of its equipment that needs to be corrected. So there is a corrective action plan on table 1 on P4 on how, as a remedial action, to correct the finding. Then when it comes to Norport Wind Farm, which starts on page 6, basically this exemption is about providing the same signals that they used to provide with the network services provider. So now they are required to provide these type of signals and communication directly to the system operator. So that we can have a main and a check, the master and the slave in terms of providing information, so the system operator can know exactly what is happening into the national grid with regards to this plan, other than relying on the NSP. With that has been said, I will just take you straight to page 8 under 14, the recommendation. It is recommended that the ALS approve the temporary exemption for Konkosi's 2 solar PV from complying with clause 7.32 and 7.33 on reactive capability. The date of expiry is 28 February 2023, and then Newport Wind Farm from complying with the temporal exemption on clause 13.2 on signals and control, which will expire on the 31st of December 22, and also approve the conditions that are stipulated under 14.2. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you, Mr. Zulu. Members, you've got the presentation before us. If you can ask questions, clarity, or any other relevant question. By show of hands, members. Thank you, Madam Massetti.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just have one question with regards to the failure to correct and fix the previously the previously approved the issues that were previously exempted within the time period that was stated by the energy regulator. Did the team on its own, apart from what may have been discussed at the GCAC, understand exactly why this licensee the licensee, I think in this case is Concourses, why this licensee could not fix the problem within the time period that was stated? If I can get clarification on that, because I don't think that it is proper to wait until the exemption period expires and then come back to the regulator and say, I want exemption again on the issue that was previously exempted. I don't think that we should just be silent and just accept it and say, well, they will keep on knocking at our door and ask for exemption, or wait until the exemption period expires and then they will keep on knocking at our door. All that we do is simply say we process the exemptions, so long as they bring other measures in place to fix the problem. I think at some point we should be the regulator when we're supposed to regulate, as opposed to just take things at face value. Having said that, I want to also understand what do we do in circumstances where the exemption has expired and there's no other exemption, and then all they come is now after the period to then come and say they want an exemption. What about the period when there is no compliance? What do we do? What is our compliance or an enforcement strategy when it comes to these matters, so that we don't just wait for people to come at the time when they feel that it suits them to come to the regulator for an exemption? I would like to understand that, Chairperson. Otherwise, then it becomes a sort of a futile exercise for the regulator to sit and look into these exemptions, yet on the other hand, we don't strengthen our sort of compliance enforcement when it comes to these matters. Thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to raise those issues and also get clarification as to what do we do under these circumstances, and also our monitoring of compliance with those exemptions, so that we don't wait until they expire and then they start coming to the regulator. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Mr. Mkhize.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks, Zoom, for the presentation. I'm covered, partly covered by what Madam Massetti has said, but also to look at the timelines to say, just try to ensure that there is some level of contingency in the timelines, partly to avoid the extension of these exemptions. And then, so please just look at that. I'm looking at the December month, for example, in table 1, where it's due on the 15th and then the 31st, and then that on the 31st of December, there will be a closeout report on that. if they are confident and you are confident technically of that being done, I'm good with it. But I think we need to always try to take precaution on such matters. And then it's just a comment, Chairperson, from my side to say, in view of the changing landscape due to the emanating also from the policy and legislation side of things, the changes, we accept that what was pronounced is not law as such at this juncture, but is pointing towards that. And therefore, it will be important that this GCAC and NERS as a regulator then plays a big role in terms of looking at the potential impacts of the envisaged changes. You can just imagine if you've got exemptions right, left, and center, how then you deal with that in a coordinated fashion and in a manner that does not jeopardize the last entrant to find that now, because the others have stressed the system, that entrant can no longer come in. So I think that would be important for me that we look at. But I take it that the team working together will, as a division, will look at this matter as well as other matters in terms of being prepared to regulate the adjusted or transformed sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. With there being no further questions, over to you to respond, Mr. Zungu, assisted by your HOD, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll start with Ms. Maseti's question to say what they have done in terms with the first exemption that was granted that expires on the 31st of March. On page 4, paragraph number 2, we do highlight that initially the Concourses thought that they were compliant because the process that they follow, they will do their own testing using the original equipment manufacturer and then submit those results to the system operator. But the system operator does not rely on the OEM when it comes to testing. They want to come on site and witness the actual test so that they can give out the compliance certificates, because these plans under the DMRE procurement process, Eskom is the buyer. So they must make sure that in terms of their performance standard, they do perform at the required level. But when RedTech came on site on the 22nd of March, they found out some of the inverters were disconnecting. But one of the underlying factors with the solar PV is that you can only perform certain tests when you have a certain solar radiation during summer season, which also talks to the corrective action plan they've provided to say it looks like it is too ambitious because it ends at the end of December on a New Year's Eve, actually. Hence, when you look at the temporary exemption, it has been granted till the end of March in 2022, just to give them a leverage, because maybe the RedTech may not be able to come and do witness test on that day. But all that they've discovered, initially the OEM thought they were fully compliant, but when Eskom team went on site to check this performance standard, the plant was not performing at that level. Then they discovered that some of the inverters were not actually working correctly. So what do we do if the exemption expires? We will try and put conditions, like to say report biannually, just give us a progress report on the regulatory side. we also put this condition of dim energy payments. But other than that, we also rely on the power purchase agreement clauses in terms of performance of the plant. But at this stage, technical problems, they can just happen at any given time. So we just give them that leverage to say, can you please fix this? It must not happen again. But we do acknowledge that these are technical issues that sometimes using a plan, and then when you actually go on site, you discover new problems. In terms of policy developments from Mr. Mkhize, we do acknowledge that we will just look at it. I hope I've covered all the questions, Chairperson. Thanks.
I guess you've mentioned the exemptions being given until the end of March, but in Table 1, you've got December, you still have December, and you still have 28th of February. Are you therefore perhaps suggesting that we actually give this, we approve that these exemptions be given until the 31st of March 2023? Is that what you are suggesting, or are you still maintaining what is in the table? Mr. Mkhize, I see your follow-up.
No. So sorry, you just covered me. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Zungu, what are you
Thanks,
actually saying?
In terms of their corrective action plan, because we will sensitize agents that it must be corrected as soon as possible. So in terms of their corrective action plan, it is stated that they will comply by the 31st of March. But in terms of looking at the December month, we are not saying they won't comply, but we also give them a 3 months leverage, just in case it does not happen. Maybe RETEC team, they are on leave, or maybe because there's one RETEC team within ESCOM that looks at all these plans, maybe in terms of the scheduling or the data that will be available, because they also use a forecast. You might find that maybe in terms of the sun radiations in December, because the summer season starts in December up until February, end of February. Hence, it was reasonable to give them up until the end of March, just to cover for, just in case, for unknowns. Thanks, Chair.
All right, thank you. So would can I ask a direct question? Would you therefore then say, would you agree that we change the date of expiry to the 31st of March on both cases to cover the eventualities that we may have raised? Is that, in Table 1, can we accordingly change the date of expiry of the temporary exemptions to the 31st of March 2023 to cover the eventualities you've raised?
Yes, we can do that, Mr. Kumete.
Right, thank you. Members, I see no other hands follow up. So can I then maybe take us to recommendations on paragraph 14, page 8, and then we can accordingly change the date of expiry of the exemptions that are sought and give them until the 31st of March 2023 to ensure that at least they are, as the question was raised by Mr. Mkhize, to ensure that we give them enough time to ensure that they comply. With that change, members, could I then see by show of hands whether you'll be comfortable with that recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Madam Pungose.
Support, Chairperson.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Madam Pungose, I am aware that you will be leaving us in 5 minutes. You will just indicate when you leave for the record. Thank you. But your request earlier was noted. Mr. Zungu, if you can go straight to item 9, please, and maybe indicate, take into account the issue that were raised before by members, if you need to.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this submission is to request the ELS to approve the amendment of clause 8.21, 8.24, 8.25, and figure 8 of the Battery Energy Storage Facilities Code. Initially, this code was approved for the first time by the Energy Regulator on the 22nd of July 2021. I just want to highlight, Chair, that when this code was approved, because there are no plans at this magnitude that are currently connected into the national grid. So it was based on studies, specifically these clauses that we are elaborating on. They were based on SANS standard, South African National Standard of SABS. But ESCOM, they've got a technology group that are actually a watchdog just to look at the developments that are happening elsewhere in the world in terms of the advancement, the commercialization of the batteries. And then they discovered in terms of the development to say there is an update when it comes to these clauses. Hence, they brought forward so that we can be aligned with the international standards. This amendment actually emanates from Figure 8. So the Figure 8, it talks about the circle, the PQ circle. A PQ circle is actually an imaginary circle. You know, it's like saying that the Earth rotates on its axis. So in terms of the national grid, we got an X and Y axis in a positive and in a negative sequence, which means that it's a capabilities of batteries to be a load and also to supply power to the national grid. That what it means, you know, in its simplest form, when we're talking about this PQ cycle, to say it's a capability, to say it is capable of providing support or power where it is mostly needed on the grid. So when they looked at Figure 8, they found out in terms of the advancement of the batteries, it has changed, because initially there was a doubt that the batteries can be a load and also provide power to the grid. Hence, these amendments have been proposed. So they emanate from Figure 8 in terms of the PQ cycle, where P is a active power, is the actual voltage that you measure, but Q is the support that these batteries can provide in terms of ramping them up and down to provide stability on the grid. So that is what this exemption is all about, taking into consideration that they are not actually connected into the national grid. It was an ambiguity that was based on advancement that are happening elsewhere. I'll then take you straight, Chair, to recommendation on page 8. We want to request the ELS to approve the amendment of clause 8.21, 8.24, 8.25, and Figure 8 of the base code. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Members, the presentation before us, if you can engage with it. Any questions, comments? Madam Pumose?
Thank you, Chairperson. I don't even have a question or comment on the item. I think I would appreciate if someone can just explain the item in less technical forms, because I went through it, but I just struggled with it to try and make sense of what it entails. Are we talking about different battery variants or strength, or what exactly are those amendments that we are proposing? Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Pumose. Mr. Manzin, the question is here. Can you talk English, please? Please.
Yes, Chair, I take that as a guidance because sometimes we write in a certain format, not knowing that maybe the message that we're trying to convey does not make sense maybe to the reader. So we'll take that as a guidance and try and improve and explain it in its simplest form as much as possible. But what are the clauses talking about? It's actually on table 1. It's just an enhancement of what it means.
Maybe before you do, Mr. Zungu, can we also then take Mr. Mkiza's question so you can respond to both? I see he's raised his hand as well. So yeah, so just for efficiency, Mr. Mkiza.
Yes. Thanks, Chairperson. Thanks, Mr. Zung, for the presentation. I think it's important that this code is just a year old, and ESCOM was participating in is part and parcel of the GCAC and participated in the review since we approved that on the 22nd of July 2021, I mean. I think it's going to be important when you write these things, you demonstrate that this is indeed urgent to do, because sometimes you've got an amendment and you need to accumulate proposed amendment before you can make changes, just so that there's a proper balance between regulatory certainty and progressive regulation, because you don't want a situation where today you are coming with this change, next time you're coming with another change. I mean, you need to change a paragraph, you need to use a different reference to a standard. You don't want to have that, so there should be that kind, and must demonstrate that the importance to do that. As you see it, there being a multi-party, other people are going to come and want to make small changes here and there, which I don't think that it serves the purpose at the end of the day. And then the other thing is that when you're using these like these figures, like figure 2, please put the X and Y axis, you know, what they stand for. And please, again, I also say that use that layman's term wherever possible. You know, it will assist. But I do appreciate the challenge that you are facing, moving from the technical to be able to explain that, to be very clear to everyone else. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you. Some of the issues are issues of enhancement, Mr. Zobo, but please proceed.
Yes, we're going to take guidance as guided because it's just enhancement, Chairperson. Thanks.
Thank you. But I guess you are going to provide a write-up for us in kind of English, just to send to the members so that we can understand exactly what we mean by those graphs and all of the issues that you raised, the P and Q and, you know, the load, as well as the, you know, yeah, all of the issues that you've raised. Please do write something up for us in English. Thank you. Members, with that commitment by the team to providing us with a more understandable layman's definition of this thing, can I see by show of hands, members, if you support the actual recommendation on paragraph 14? Thank you, Madam Massetti. Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Thank you, Madam Bongase. Thank you that you are still with us. All right, so Mr. Zungu, you've got your decision. If we can then move on to item 10. Who's presenting that?
Chairperson, the item 10 and 11 will be presented by Mr. Hore. If you allow us, Chairperson, if we can take them at the same time, because they are similar and they have served at the LS of 5th July, where members raise some questions or clarity. And there's this submission 6 to address those in page 4, 5 in both submission. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Shozi. Yes, your request is granted. If Mr. Hore, if you can present both of them.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, item 10 and 11 matters arising. They were considered in the last ELS, and members did not approve because of some questions that arose. The submission titles themselves were written as correction of tariffs approved by the energy regulator. Then the members indicated that NESA cannot review its own decisions, and members requested to see where the error occurred from. It was indicated that the error originated from the applicant, and the applicant is now applying for the tariff to be amended. That was approved. Then members then requested that legal look to the application and guide staff accordingly. And legal guided that since the mistake was made by the applicant, the submission itself should be titled Amendment of Refinancing Tariff, not correction of the approved refinancing tariff. And the legal inputs have since been included in the submissions, and especially on paragraph 6, you can see the answers to the members' questions. I will take the matter as read and request the approval of the amendment of the refinancing tariffs as on the submission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hore. Members, you've got the presentation of both items. If you've got any questions or clarity, comments on either one of them, they are very similar as indicated. With no questions, members, thank you, Madam Pungose, and thank you for staying on an extra 5 minutes. Much appreciated. Madam Maseti, you still have a question, ma'am? You can go ahead. We'll tackle both. Hopefully the question applied to both, would apply to both items.
Yes. Chairperson, I just want to understand what then happens to the other decision. I take it that this is like a new application altogether. It's not an application that attempts to sort of clarify or sort of correct in a way that decision. For the lack of a better word, I'm using correct. I just want to understand with the decision that we have previously taken, what happens to that decision as we now looking at a new decision altogether. I just want to understand that, Chairperson, at least from our side as the regulator, are those treated as completely different decisions, and then that one will just fall by the wayside because it's not going to be used at all. The one that might be used is the one that we are required to take today. Just want to understand in terms of process and procedure on these things. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Maseti. Any further question from members? If not, I see your hand is up, Mr. Siamela. I'd like to assist in responding.
I would like to assist Chair in terms of the submission, and I profusely apologize because my voice, if it's not clear whatsoever, I'll try to put some of the things on the chat. What happened here is that we took this submission previously in the ELS, and then initially it was refinancing. The titling was not necessarily correct, okay, because it looks like it's reviewing the previous decision that was done by the energy regulator. So we talked to the IPP office, we talked to legal, we talked to Lina from IPP office, we talked to the
Mr. Siamel, I was allowing you to talk, but I think...
Can you hear me, Chair? Can you hear me?
Yes, I am, but I was allowing you to talk, but at this stage, I was actually just requesting responses to the questions raised by members.
Yeah, I'm responding to the question that raised. I'm responding to that one.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. If you could hear me.
No, we are clear. We are clear.
Now. Yeah, because my network is not good as well. So all I'm saying is that no, the previous submission that went to the ELS that was not approved, it was returned. We really appreciated that because it gave us an opportunity to deal with it. So what we did, this was a legal issue, okay, to say that no, it has to be an amendment. Most amendments, they normally happen a lot under distribution licenses. And the interregulator can issue a license, a new license, and amend it. And normally the ones for distribution, we get amendments. So from where I stand, or my standpoint of view, if it's an amendment, it's clear cut, decision that they naturally have the discretion to deal with it. But because I'm not a legal person, and then we also talked to the IPP office, we talked to the lawyers from the applicant side agreed with us that no, it's an amendment. IPP also agreed as an amendment. We also talked to legal, our legal within NESA, which is advocate Mbonisen Morati. He assisted a lot. And amendment happens a lot, even happens in generation. It hasn't happened yet in transmission. We want to show how things will be done, dealt with. But we've seen amendments in a lot of them in distribution, a lot of them in generation. So if it's an amendment, something else that no, the energy has got a decision to deal with it as per the Energy Holder Act. But you know, since I'm not a lawyer, I'm a technical person, I will actually request that Advocate Mbonisen Morati comes in as our support to deal with this one and to actually respond appropriately from a legal point of view from what Madam Maseti is saying, to say that what happens to the previous decision. From where I sit, if a new license is issued and it gets amended, it should be an issue, but let him use the legal reasoning that's applicable to this application. And
Mr. Murat, if you can assist, please. The question is straightforward. What happens to the previous decision when there's an amendment? Mr. Murati, if you are on the call. If not, can I request that Mr. Horek, if you can assist?
Yes. In short, let me just say that's the question that we asked our legal, and our legal guided us that decision, it still stands, but the applicant is now applying for amendment of that decision that was made. It's only that, as we had said, is applying for the correction. And then we're guided that the applicant cannot apply for the correction. It is going to be applying for the amendment of the energy regulator decision and give out the facts that the reason why it is applying for the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. I'm not sure whether Madam Maseti is fully responded to, but I would assume and I stand corrected that once we make a new decision, because the applicant has applied for a new decision. Once we've made a new decision, then this new decision would supersede the previous decision. That would be my interpretation, but I assume Madam Seti, you would have wanted to have that clearly indicated on the submission, that this decision would then supersede whichever previous decision that we may have had. So even in terms of the tariffs that may be reflected in the PPA, this decision would then supersede those previous decisions. I'm hoping it's clear, but I think for me that's what legally that's what it would mean. I hope we are, Madam Maseti, are you covered?
Yes, Chairperson. I think you've tried on that one, Chairperson. It's much better, the explanation that you've provided, except that you can imagine a situation where a licensee, whether it's in gas or petroleum pipelines industry, but this licensee have come before us applying for a tariff, and we give them a tariff of say 6 rands per gigajoule. I'm using gas now. Give them a tariff of 6 rands per gigajoule. Now, this licensee does not like that decision, or say that, oh well, there was an error. I should have applied for 7 rands per gigajoule, not 6 rands. There was just an error. Then it comes back to us to apply now for the tariff of 7 rands. And then that's where I'm asking, what then happened to that decision of 6 rands per gigajoule? Because that decision remains valid, and that decision can only be set aside by the court of law, by the High Court. That's one thing. Whether there's an error or whatever, but it must be set aside by the High Court. So I don't have a problem where now there is a new application altogether asking for a tariff of 7 rands per gigajoule. And then we look at those facts and separately, and we're not necessarily looking back at that one of 6 rands per gigajoule. So it will therefore be 2 decisions of the energy regulator. So for purposes of our monitoring of compliance as we should, then that's where I am asking, what decision then will then be applicable for our purposes of ensuring compliance as we are required to do so in the Act? Because both decisions, they are still valid in my view. So hence I need a just clarification on that one, Chairperson, just in terms of procedure, so that I know what the implications are in terms of the new decision that we are required to take, Chair. I think it's a fair question for the members of the regulator to have a better understanding of what happens. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam. I see Mr. Murati is on the call. If you can kindly assist Mr. Murati, what happens now? There's an application for an amendment to a previous decision, and we take a new decision. What happens to the previous decision?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, members. I think it follows from the decision, the status of a decision. The once Section 16 of the ERA application is made for an amendment of a standing decision, the replacing decision becomes the regulatory decision applicable for the period. So then once the new decision has been made, there will not be two decisions that are in existence. Then the decision that was made pursuant to an application becomes the binding enforceable regulatory decision. But Chairperson, I also think I need the aspect that Madam Mashedi touched on to highlight one cardinal principle to it, is that the consideration of this kind of an application, it cannot be an application brought on similar facts. It has to be an application brought, bringing in the new character to the application. Because if it's an application brought on similar facts, it becomes a review of the decision which we do not have jurisdiction to deal with such. So the cardinal identifiable feature of the application, it's a new fact that has been highlighted in the application to make it, to clothe the regulator with the powers to look into the application. That becomes, otherwise, if it's on similar facts, the provisions of Section 10.3 of NERA becomes applicable. The approach must be directed to the High Court for the relief of such. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I note your comment on the chat, Madam Massetti. With that, members, having been responded, and with a clear indication that the amendment can't be based or predicated on this exactly the same facts, there must be something that has changed, and if we are comfortable with that, members, can I direct you then to the decision in terms of item? We'll now take the items one by one. In terms of item 10, the decision that is sought is on page 137 of 362, and is under paragraph 14. To read it in the record is that the Electricity Subcommittee is requested to approve the refinancing of the tariff reduction. Now that I've highlighted this, I don't know whether the numbers are meant to be indicated publicly or not. So just to be on the safe side, can I just not read any of those numbers out loud? But basically then for 14.1.2 is that the ELS is requested to approve the inclusion of the amendment tariff in the PPA, and 14.1.3 that the draft decision and the draft reason for decision document is also approved. By show of hands, members, if we can approve that. Thank you, Madam Massetti. I also support thank you, Mr. Mkhize. So you've got your decision, Mr. Hore. So members, can I also then take you to exactly the same paragraph in the next presentation, in the next, in terms of paragraph, this case is paragraph 13, but in terms of item 11, members, by it's there's just the numbers that are different, but the recommendations are exactly the same. Can I then ask members if we can, by show of hands, approve this decision as well?
Yes, Chairperson, maybe for the record, for this particular decision, if you can read out the applicant on this decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that guidance. So the applicant on this one is Umoya Energy Pty Limited, and it's also applying for the amendment. It's also applying to amend the refinancing tariff. And I will not read out the numbers, but it's actually the same thing. Okay, thank you. I see your hand is up, Mr. Nkiza. Thank you for this for the support of the recommendation. Thank you, Madam Maseti. I also support. Mr. Hore, you have your decision on item 11. If we can then move on to item 12. Mr. Shozi, who's taking this one?
Chairperson, Mr. Nkiza Jr. will take us through on this one. Over to you, Walid.
Thank you, Mr. Nkiza Jr.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, members, and good morning, colleagues. I'll be taking you through an exemption once again with regards to Appendix 9 of the RPP Grid Code, version 3.1. So the purpose of the submission is to request the ELS to approve temporary exemptions for quite a number of RPP plans, which are stated in section 2 of the document. Now, if I can just draw your attention to table 1, the plans that have requested exemption are listed there, and a number of them are requesting extensions on top of existing exemptions. So these were considered at the GCAC on the 26th of May of this year, and they were approved by the GCAC after quite a number of deliberations, particularly around the issue of the request for extensions on top of extensions. So what I did was that I created another table, which is table 2, which summarizes all the applicants' reasons for non-compliance and the various remedial actions that they would put in place in order to deal with those situations. And these issues ranged from the need to update their models as a result of RETEC, who have asked that the models should not be external files, but should be part of the Dix Island Power Factory model, and also reasons such as the companies that need to do the tests being unavailable since they are on demand around the world. And then also the unforeseen amounts, even amounting to some amounting to about R1 million for the unforeseen model changes that need to be done to comply with the grid code. And so, but I've listed all the various reasons for non-compliance, and I've highlighted where extensions are required on top of an existing extension. Now, maybe just to highlight the purpose of this particular requirement in the grid code, these tests are done every 6 years to ensure that the plant is still compliant and that any changes to the configuration of the network are taken into account, and that necessary changes or adjustments are made to the plant to suit the prevailing conditions. So those particular plants then require the exemption, and we are here to ask the electricity subcommittee drawing your attention to section 14 to approve the temporary exemptions as outlined in table 3. And also just to maybe highlight the fact that we've taken pains to ask the applicants to provide us with project plans so that we can try and manage their progress better. So Appendix A contains the plans that were submitted by some, but not all of the plans that have applied. So with that, Chair, thank you for the opportunity to present. Thank you, Chair. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Members, you've got the item before us. Any questions or clarity, comments? If not, can I just ask one question to you, Mr. Mkhize and Mr. Shozi? I guess it's maybe something that Mr. Shozi may respond to. With the similar plans, if they are registered rather than licensed, do they need to comply to these codes? And if they're not complying, how do we deal with them not complying? Is there anybody that's responsible for checking that they are compliant to the grid code, seeing that they are actually connected to the grid? Or because they are registered, they are not necessarily obliged to comply with this? Just a level question to you, Mr. Shozi.
Yeah, Chair, but as far as I'm aware, is that registered or not registered, this plan, they still need to comply with regulatory tools, including a grid code. So they are not exempted. In the codes themselves, there are categories. If the plans of this size, they'll have to comply with particular requirements of the code. So it's not a blanket for everyone. So they will still have to comply with the grid code, whether they are registered or licensed.
And therefore, the expectation is that even with registrants, would they need to come before the regulator to ask for exemption? I guess that in essence is the question I'm asking. Or is there another route? Yeah.
I think the colleagues, they'll assist. We have not received, because we have been registering. Okay, we have done big plans now. We have modern plans that are up to probably 75 megawatts. They'll go through the same testing like even the registered. When they have to connect, they'll go through the same testing like the licensed one. So at that stage, then the network services provider will determine which part of the grid code they are not compliant with, to come to the regulator to be because I'm not sure about the content of the certificate itself, but I'm certain that there is a part that talks about grid code compliant as a condition to their registration certificate. I'm talking under correction. Colleagues that are dealing with registration may assist.
Before they do, I see Voiceover has put something on the chat, but Mr. Mkhize, did I trigger a question in your head? Yeah.
No, Chairperson, what you are talking to actually is what I referred to earlier on, to say that with the changing landscape, what are it's going to be important for this unit to also weigh in terms of how it's going to impact in terms of regulation going forward, and also to assess the prospective players in this space to understand that not being licensed on its own does not mean that they don't comply with this, which we are going to. I think they would, as Vuiswa Makubane has indicated, in terms of it coming from the NSP and the system operator to ensure that this compliance does take place. So. But I think that I'm looking forward not necessarily to a response now, but to that process as to saying how do we see regulation going forward in view of these landscape changes with this issue of compliance to the codes played also taking center stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Madam Makubane would like to add something. But I think the overall, before you add, I think the overall request to yourselves, Mr. Shozi team, is that if you can provide the energy regulator with a comprehensive analysis from the technical side in terms of the implication of this registration process, especially now that it's been upped. Well, there is no limit now to the threshold. Well, at least once the new notice is promulgated, there won't be. So we need to have a good understanding of the implication in terms of the code. But Madam Akubane, please proceed, ma'am.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that in terms of over and above what Mr. Shozi has indicated, that the code does classify its requirements according to technology and size, but we are undergoing a process of amending some of the codes, including the governance code, so that it talks directly, or rather that it specifies registrants explicitly, because you would know that licensees or registrants may want to find loopholes in terms of the wording of the code. So that is underway to ensure that registrants are called specifically, and therefore there's no ambiguity around whether they should comply or not. But I don't know if Mr. Morati was still in the room, but there is, in terms of whether NERSA would be receiving exemptions for registrants in particular, there is a legality aspect that we just probably need to unpack for the members, and we can do that in that comprehensive analysis that you requested, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Akubane. And I think Mr. Morati will also be requested to provide that legal guidance. Members, can I then take you to the decision that is sought is on paragraph 14 on page 11. It spills over to page 12. Can I, members, by show of hands to see whether you can actually approve as requested? Thank you, Madam Assetti. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I also support approval. So you've got your decision, Mr. Mkhize Jr. If you can then now move to item 13, it's on the item itself, it reads as item 12, but it's actually item 13. Who's presenting this one?
I'd like to think it's Mr. Mwanza, Chairperson.
Mr. Mwanza, if you can go ahead, sir.
Who's presenting? Thank you.
Mr. Mwanza, we didn't quite get what you were saying. So who's presenting? It's not yourself?
Khothatso Ranaman. Ms. Khothatso Ranaman.
Okay. Ms. Rangaman, if you can proceed, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues and members. The purpose of this submission is to request the Electricity Subcommittee to recommend to the Energy Regulator to approve the new power purchase agreement between RCL Foods and Power X Pty Ltd. Chair, the consideration of this new power purchase agreement is delegated to ELS for recommendation to the Energy Regulator for approval, as paragraph 1.11 of the approved delegation matrix. Chair, RCL Food had a PPA with PowerX from January 2015 to December 2020. Then the PPA was extended in accordance with the provision of the PPA. And the extension was valid for a year to expire on 31 December 2021. And then on the 23rd of August 2021, the Energy Regulator approved the extension of the PPA for that period until the 31 of December 2021. And then on the 23rd of May 2022, NERSA received the application of the amendment of Schedule 3 of RCL Foods Generation License to reflect the new PPA arrangements. PowerX has expressed the need to continue buying electricity from RCL Foods So the parties concluded a 5-year power purchase agreement on the 11th of May 2022. And then according to the PPH, 90% of the generated capacity will be reserved for own use by RCL Foods for its operations. And then the remaining excess 10% of the generated capacity will be sold to PowerX. RCL Foods has complied with the license conditions by submitting an application to NERSA to approve the new PPA between them and PowerX. And then the PPA tariff and the analysis of the PPA are in the draft RFD as an attachment. The recommendations, Chair, is that the Electricity Subcommittee recommend to the Energy Regulator to approve the new PPA between RCL Foods and PowerX, and then to approve the amendment of Schedule 3 of the generation license to reflect PowerX as the buyer according to the new PPA, and then to note the tariff between RCL Foods and PowerX, and then to approve the draft reasons for decisions documentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ranamane. Colleagues, you've got the item before us. If you can engage with it, any questions, clarity, questions, perhaps any enhancements? Doesn't look like there's anything. I think it's clear enough. So if I can then maybe take members to paragraph 13 on page 707, page 179 of 362. The colleague has read it for us in detail. So can I just see by show of hands if we approve the recommendation on paragraph 13? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Ramaseti, would you support?
Yes, Chairperson, my hand is delaying. Thanks.
Thank you. I also support. So, Ms. Ranamane, you've got your decision. It is supported. We now move to the last item, which is substantive item number 14. I note that Ms. Masetti, you said you would like to be excused at 11:30. Let's see. I'm hoping that at least we would have dealt with this substantive matter. Mr. Mkhize, I assume this is an old hand. Thank you. This one, I assume, Mr. Shozi, that it will be presented by Mr. Ntageni.
Yes, Chair, it will be, but can I just make some introductory remarks, if you don't mind, Chairperson?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Sichotlo. Actually, that is very welcomed. Thank you.
Yes, Chair. First of all, Chair, let us, for members and anyone that is going to be presenting, can we take note that numbers, except those that are from ESCOM that have already been published, numbers are not to be mentioned at this forum because we are still going to the ER. That is the first comment, Chairperson. And then there is just cosmetic corrections. On table 2, Chairperson, the last column, the second last column, it talks about December 2020. It's supposed to be 2021. And then the other one, it's also on 4.3, paragraph 1.3 is the same mistake. It's supposed to be 2021. It says 2020. So we just correct that one. But Chairperson, in terms of what we are bringing to this committee, we received an application from ESCOM in November 2021. They confirmed their confidentiality, Chairperson, in December. And because we cannot normally, as long as a matter is not that urgent, we normally don't publish in December and January. So we published on the 14th of February. And we received only one submission, Chairperson, and that was from OUTA. And we had planned to have public hearings in April. However, no presenters, no registrants contacted us. Therefore, those public hearings were not held. Chairperson, in a nutshell, ESCOM is applying for a total RCA of 10.6 billion. However, we have done our own analysis, and in the RFD,
which will be presented by Mr. Ntakeni and team. We will then give you the final number, however, without mentioning that number in this meeting. Thank you, Chair. I think that is the comments I wanted to make for this meeting. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chotro, for the guidance. Mr. Ntakeni?
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Mr. Chotro, for that introduction. Straight into the decision. The decision is mainly driven by the revenue, the line item revenue variance. As you can see, Eskom had applied for an amount of 9.7, and our adjustment, as you can see, and it gives Eskom a decision as reflected in the last column. And the second line items that drives the decision is the expenditure, which I believe the team leaders are on call and they will give details. And the last second last line item is the primary energy and the return. Those are the main items that drives the decision that you see on the last column, the total RCA balance. On that note, Chairperson, if we can ask Dr. Bongani to take us through the sales variance section. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
May I maybe make a suggestion?
Yes, Mr. Shadler, please proceed.
I think that is a big one. Let's allow Bongani to introduce that one. But can I ask, because of the challenge that we have with Ms. Massetti, that we only allow that one because it's the big item. But the others, can I ask that we take that members have read, and then they can ask questions and then we can respond, so that we can actually allow, because we need Ms. Massetti for this decision, because once she can leave, you will be left with no correct.
Understood, Mrs. Chotler. I must admit, because this is a numbers-based submission, I'd like to, I'll give it over to you, Dr. Konjelayo, to see how you present numbers without presenting numbers. But at least the members would have read. You can maybe just indicate. You can point the members to the line item on the paragraph on the tables. But over to you, Dr. Konjelayo.
Yes. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members and colleagues. So the revenue variance section commences on page 77 of 105. If I use the numbers at the bottom of the page, Eskom's application, revenue application is shown on table 56. They applied for a revenue variance of 9.7 billion, and the revenue variance mainly arises from standard tariff customers. If you go to table 57, the biggest variance is from standard tariff customer sales, with a variance of over 16,000 kilowatt hours. And then, if I may take members to so the approach that we took with this RCA is similar to other RCAs, where we look at both demand and supply side issues that impacted on Eskom's the application. The first one being the being the plant performance as measured by the energy availability factor. So from page 79 of 105, we talk about the fact that Eskom had a target of plant availability of 72.5%, but they only achieved 64.2%, and it is due mainly to planned and unplanned outages. This led to load shedding of 1,034 gigawatt hours for the financial year of 2020-21. So Eskom provides a number of reasons why they had to load shed, and some of those include the fact that there were delays in returning Quebec to service. There were also trips and breakdowns, as well as forced shutdowns. There were also boiler tube leaks, as well as outage slippages. But in our analysis, we also note that Eskom ran the fleet too hard, and they, in some instances, deferred maintenance, and also the issues around the poor design of new build plans also contributed to them not being able to meet the demand due to leading to capacity constraints. And in some instances, Eskom also channeled funds that were meant for maintenance to other activities. I don't know if Ms. Makubane would want to add anything around the issue of the plant performance before I move on to the next section, Chair.
Well, the guidance from Mr. Sichotlo was that you only talk to the sales variance. Are we still fine, Mr. Sichotlo, that we then look at the other items or consider other items as read?
Probably, Chair, because this one goes hand in hand with what Ms. Makubane is going to be presenting. Can we do that one, and then we can then take questions from members?
All right. Well, please go ahead, Ms. Makubane.
Chair, Dr. Kujolai has touched on the main drivers. I have nothing new to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam. Any other large item that would want us to talk to, Mr. Sichotlo?
Sorry, Chair. So the sales variance section is not really complete, but I'll just try and just summarize quickly in terms of the assessment that we did on the variance. So this plant performance section is within the sales variance section on the supply side. Yes. So yes, quickly. So Chair, then we also looked at the issue of load shedding and curtailment, which contributes to Eskom's decline in sales, and that is due to the fact that Eskom, not only are they load shedding, but they cannot provide commitments in terms of capacity to even to new investors or people who want to invest in the sector, further exacerbating the issue of sales. And Chair, we also looked at load reduction. Load reduction is different from load shedding because load reduction occurs from a distribution where there are issues around where the system becomes overloaded, either due to illegal connections or customers that are overloading the system, where they consume or where their demand is more than what is planned. So initially, previously, we've never looked at this aspect, because what happens is that this load reduction contributes to the decline in sales, and then this variance normally would be recovered from other customers. So in this instance, we sent questions to Eskom to say, is it fair that all customers must pay for decline in sales arising from load reduction? And Eskom's view is that yes, it should be shared by all customers, but we feel that Eskom has really not demonstrated how they have from their side manage this risk, because as part of their license conditions, they need to manage the risk and plan for increasing demand in their network. So we recommend that this variance, even though it's small, but I think it's symbolic in terms of sending a message to Eskom that they once they provide a more extensive report on what they are doing to manage this phenomenon from their side, we can maybe decide whether to allow this. And then, Chair, we also look at the impact of prices, and we see that the prices are really impacting on sales. And looking at some of the studies there that show that over the years, customers have become more sensitive to price increases, and they're also looking for alternative sources. Chair. And then lastly, on page 92 of 105, we have the decision there. Our premise for the decision is that section 17.2.4.1 of the MYPD methodology allows the regulator to assess the reasons for lower sales, and in the decision may make adjustments on that basis. And we've shown that both from the demand and supply side, Eskom has contributed to lower sales. And our approach is that we allow Eskom only to recover fixed costs, and that decision, the Chair, is on table 64. If I may stop there, Chair, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Conjolayo. I must admit, before I open up to members, how does that decision on page 64, on table 64, talk to the decision that on table 1 or table 2 of the actual RFD?
Yes, Chair. So on the RFD, maybe Mr. Takini, because we did have a discussion last night about this sub decision and the one on table 2. So because what we do there, we allow Eskom, so we adjust for the load reduction. So the load shedding has already been deducted, and then we also give back Eskom because for variances arising from a lower usage of coal. So this is the decision that was taken from the coal section, and then we also adjust for variable costs, and then that number there it's what should go into the decision. But because there are also other adjustments to the final decision, so it maybe Mr. Ntakeni can just explain on table 2 where the differences are.
But Chair, maybe before Mr. Ntakeni comes in, I think maybe it's a matter of the language we are using. The number that Dr. Conjolayo is talking about is analysis, but the actual decision is the one that is on table 1 or 2. But these are inputs to that decision. It's not the actual decision that we are seeking. And maybe that is where the confusion may be coming from.
That's clear. So and I think in terms of table 1 on page 2 of 105, the number that Dr. Conjolayo was talking to is the decision on the revenue line, but the actual total RCA balance that is recommended is the last line.
The one at the bottom.
It's the last line. Okay, clear. Members, there is the item before you. I know, Madam Massetti, you requested to be excused at 11:30. So can I then request that we start by you if you've got any questions, and hopefully we'll be able to make a decision before you leave. Because if you left, we won't be able to make a decision, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Yes, please proceed, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity. Chairperson, I won't be able to go through all of the other issues because I take it that even though the team has done its analysis, pointing out challenges on the part of Eskom, what Eskom ought to have done, which has not done, all of that, at the end, when they are now required to make an adjustment that will make sure that we do not compensate for poor performance and to compensate for supply that was not there, that was constrained. We point those things out, but we don't adjust for those things. What I mean by that is this, that we don't adjust simply because we continue to take the approach of a fixed cost argument. That fixed cost argument has not helped because it doesn't force Eskom to change anything. Where the plant was available and did not perform, and there was load shedding, consumers suffered, actually they suffered harm, financial losses, varied extent of harm on consumers as a result of plant breakdowns, plant not being available and not being able to generate electricity that was required to meet the demand. Despite that, what we do, we say, irrespective of that, those plants we will reinvest them. We will compensate Eskom for that. But those plants were never used, and they were not usable at the time that they were required. But despite that, we still maintain that a fixed cost compensation argument must still prevail. I have a problem with that, Chairperson, because there is no point. That approach has not yielded anything. It has not changed the behavior of the licensee. Surely through this kind of considerations, this kind of applications, when they come to before us, we should at least be in a position to take decisions that will ensure that the behavior of the licensee will change. Surely Eskom has other levers that it can use to improve plant performance. They are capable of doing that. We cannot doubt them. They are also capable of ensuring that if they were to change the maintenance regime and conduct maintenance in such a way that it will at least improve plant availability and also improve the energy availability factor level. If they were to do that maintenance in that manner, surely then, at least from our side, once we satisfy ourselves about what kind of maintenance regime was maintained by Eskom during the period under review, are we satisfied with that maintenance regime? Despite the fact that we will look at other risks that we may think that they were beyond their control, but at least first things first, if we can't from our side assess the way that maintenance was done, quality of maintenance, scope of maintenance, and so that they can limit these sort of consistent breakdowns, are we able, at least on that as a regulator, satisfy ourselves on that maintenance regime? Before we can then go back and say they've done their best here, and therefore they couldn't improve the EAF, and they could not improve the plant availability and also the amount of electricity that they undertook to generate. That, for me, must come out of the analysis, because we can't therefore just rush into the issue of the fixed cost that nevertheless they do have these capital assets, and they must pay for the capital assets that did not assist, and they were not available, they were not used, they were not usable, which are the terms that at least what guides us, even when we apply the efficiency test in terms of our law, our regulations, when we are required to compensate if all the costs that we view as being efficient. And prudency test then also comes in, those two tests here. Before we then get to the decision also on the public interest, having applied these two tests and having looked at the facts, are the facts supporting this kind of approach that we have taken here? So for me, Chairperson, I'm worried. Firstly, that must be stated clearly on the issue of the fixed cost, the way that we apply the fixed cost argument, which then, overlook all of the problems where we should have adjusted. Because we now say at the end, no, it doesn't matter. Let's only adjust on the variable cost, not the fixed cost. Of which fixed cost, by the way, what fixed cost? When these plants are so old, number one, and also these plants could not perform. Isn't it that even when we look at the value of these plants, replacement value of these plants, you must take into account performance as well as the efficiency and also this availability? Shouldn't we take those factors into consideration before we can just be comfortable to follow the fixed cost? I guess I made my point very clearly, Chair, on the issue of the fixed cost regarding those factors that we must take into account before we can just say that they are fixed cost. Were they available? Were they usable? Were they used? And look also at whether these very same assets that we are so worried, want to protect them when they have not performed? Is it fair, therefore, that we say consumers and other ratepayers, businesses and so forth, they must pay for that? We say they must pay for that even when they actually suffered harm, financial harm, and a lot of other things. So that for me is a problem that must be factored in the analysis. In addition to that, the analysis chairperson must then touch on that very first issue of the maintenance regime that was conducted. And moving on, then chairperson, with what we have proposed here, I wanted to just also look into, at least to say that the submission must be enhanced to deal with the demand side factors in terms of the analysis. Affordability aspect, at least it must come out, chairperson. We can't not deal with that. It has been stated several times by stakeholders, but also from our side, it is important that in as much as we just say, let's approve and approve and approve, all of these variances, increase in the tariffs, but we never take a step where we say all of these increases, are we certain as a regulator that consumers are going to be in a position to afford them? We can't not mention issue of affordability given the ever rising electricity tariffs that we approve from our side. It is important that we do that because the objectives of the Act are very clear, that we take into account the interest of the existing and the future customers and ratepayers of the electricity industry. So that becomes important. The other critical factor, by the way, chairperson, that must have affected the electricity sales targets for that year is the issue of price sensitivity, that is price elasticity of demand. How did we adjust for that? The price, because remember there's these issues of adjustment from the supply side, given the supply constraints and therefore this load shedding and so forth, right? Because of those technical challenges on the supply side. But with regards to the price, the demand side factors in particular, price sensitivity or price elasticity, how did we adjust for that, chairperson? Because I think that also becomes important, an important factor to adjust for. So that aspect must be lifted up, chairperson, so that we can look into how well we can take this, because I mean it's a basic economic consideration. If prices go up, obviously they will affect the demand. It's an inverse relationship. But does our regulatory decision as an economic regulator, does it reflect that inverse relationship between price and the demand? Or are we changing the economics here? We say that as this economic regulator in South Africa, no, ours work differently. That economic principle does not apply at all. There are certain issues, it must change that principle. In South Africa, it doesn't work like that. So the established principle, it changes. This economic regulator says it changes. Are we trying to say that with regards to our decision if we don't adjust on the basis of the price elasticity, especially the own price elasticity of demand? Because you increase the price on your own, and now you have to face your own demand curve, the individual demand curve. Apart from the market demand curve, we know that they are dominant, but now it's caused by use. Now people are switching maybe to their own generation and so forth, and they are also reducing the consumption as well. So there's a reduction of consumption, but there's also the switching aspect, which is translated into this price elasticity of demand. So how do we reflect that in our analysis as well as in our decision in terms of the adjustments that we need to take here to say, no. What happened here is a normal situation, translating or reflecting the inverse relationship between the demand and between the price and the demand. And therefore, you can't now, in terms of the shortfall on your sales targets, now want to punish customers, because what happened here is normal. Where do we reflect that in our decision? I think it's a straightforward question. It must just be analyzed and be dealt with in that fashion, Chairperson. Having mentioned that as the last point, Chairperson, having mentioned that, and I think also Dr. Konjelwa also stated the issue of the shortfall on sales here, asking Eskom specifically why they should be compensated for sales that they have never realized, they never achieved. Now, I want to find out if we have ever received maybe an opinion on this particular issue, that if the licensee has stated that it will, generate these sales, and it has also put forward, the production plan before us in terms of its own assumptions to NERSA, and also stated that their EAF will be at this level given the production plan that it has anticipated and proposed to NERSA, and therefore our agreement and understanding were based on those assumptions. Now, they have not realized those assumptions because of their own failures, not anybody else, where you would have said that, no, it was a forecast and projected and all of that, because of their own failures, of which failures could have been managed better even by the issues of maintenance and the other things. Now, because of their own failures that were within their control, when they fail now on achieving the targets that they've set for themselves, having given us the assumptions. Now, have we ever asked, get a legal opinion on that particular issue to ask, is it correct for the energy regulator to allow that they must nevertheless be compensated for electricity sales that they've never achieved? And point out all the other issues that I've stated earlier on, Chairperson. Is it correct to proceed on that basis? And what does that mean? What do we do to the electricity industry if we continue on that path? I just want to check that is the last question from my side, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Any questions from you, Mr. Mkhize? Or can I just ask the colleagues to respond?
Thanks, Chairperson. And thanks to the presenters. I just got a concern, one being, to be given sufficient time on this, because there have been challenges that one has faced. Yes, one had almost just a day to get this through. I just want to mention that because of the challenges. And secondly, one would have loved to have to workshop this, noting the other questions that come through. But be as it may, let me proceed, Chairperson, and just get clarification from the team. I would like to know, we're saying that we've got an 8.3% variance in terms of what the performance would have been in terms of the energy availability factor. And then if you look at table 59, for example, and then to say, how does this then impact the deemed RAB? Because then you'd have then the RAB being deemed based on the availability. That is when now you're applying prudence as a principle. I just want to understand how that one is featured in. And also, if I look at, for example, if you go to table 60, you then see the different generation technologies applied there by Eskom. In fact, on the table, even the the coal fleet there should be removed because it is just the fleet, because it includes coal and nuclear, OCGTs, etc. Just to have it a proper table there, the naming of the table. And I would like to know from the team if the use of alternative technology, is it deemed to be the lowest that could have been used instead of using taking what was provided. What I'm trying to say is that if you use OCGT when you have not fully utilized the lowest available, like you fully utilize coal, you deem the cost on the OCGT to be coal equivalent instead of taking it as is, because it's higher. And if they were efficient, they would have used with their fleet, they would have been able to then sequence them accordingly, and hence then not grant them what they actually spent. Just want to to understand that. And then when now that we're talking in retrospectively, you've got maintenance. How does the maintenance that they're putting forward balance with plant availability thereafter? Because we're in 2022 now, and they were saying that they were maintaining, but how does it translate to plant availability afterwards? Because if that doesn't, then why discount that maintenance as maintenance that was actually yielding the envisaged results? So I've got my huge complaint is around the availability and the use of the plant. And if you look at just pardon me a bit, Chair. You see, if you look at the COVID-19, for example, it being a black swan event, should all the costs just be attributable to them, and not try to balance that with the issue that there's nothing that the customers will have done. The customers cannot have a force majeure, whereas an entity could have maybe had put a force majeure to not being able to supply. The customer cannot say, I cannot be able to take. It's beyond my control. And then if I look, for example, at 7.8.8, where there's the issue of the biggest contributor to lower redistributor sales, they're saying that they talk about city power there, but the question is, if they've got to rely on their own plant because of Eskom's own inefficiencies, why do we just take what Eskom is telling us and not necessarily include the net impact? I know Madam Masetti was talking of it as I would say elasticity, but also looking from another angle to say that there are even prospective customers that say we cannot go this route because the supply is not stable. We've got, for example, here a talk of like City of Cape Town switching more to or migrating to clean energy sources. Shouldn't that be deemed to be a loss that was self-inflicted? So that for me would be a concern. Just talking on these figures in terms of the prudence, and my question is still out, that when is prudence going to be done for Eskom? Yeah, I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Colleagues, you've got the questions from the members. If we can assist with the response, please.
Okay, Chair, yes, I will start.
Sorry, Chairperson. The other issue was around the legal argument at the beginning. Just wanted to get confirmation that in terms of proceeding in the manner that we have proceeded to deal with this in the midst of all these other court cases and everything, that the licensee involved is also happy that we proceed, at least to just to understand that aspect in terms of in the midst of all of this, what is the stance of the applicant?
Okay, I hope the question is clear, colleagues. All right, if we can start, Dr. K.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So the issue of fixed cost, we actually previously deliberated on this one with the rep team that so when the decision was made, the rep team already adjusted for factors such as lower plant availability. So the decision on table 64 is based on NESA's own assessment of rep and what was allowed at the time. So the similar approach was also adopted for MIPD 5, where the rep team assessed the fixed costs and made adjustments to the rep. If you remember, on the MIPD 4 application, I think what ESCOM applied, the rep was sitting at around 1.2, 1.3 trillion. So in the decision that was made then, so the depreciation and the return that would have earned then has already been taken into account when the fixed cost determination was made on table 64. And also that sorry, Chair, on table 63, that split for 6634. So it's made, that split is calculated from the NESA's decision, which has already taken into account all the adjustment around the fixed cost and planned inefficiencies and other costs related to the issue of used and usable. But I will expand there in terms of the analysis to link this to what is done on the rep side. Sorry, Chair, I see Mr. Mkhize. I don't know if he wants to follow up on this one.
Yeah, just on that one, I would like to know, because yes, the adjustment was done, but it was done looking forward. As the further adjustment done now looking back, reconciling to say it should be further reduced in terms of the RAP, for example.
Yes, Chair. Yeah, thanks. That's a very valid question. We'll look at it with the rep team to see if there are any further enhancement that need to be done. But I see Mr. Shabalala through you, Chair. I think he wants to assist in that regard.
Thank you, Dr. K. That's just a quick one. Actually, we've indicated that ESCOM's fleet this time around actually achieved a 64% EAF as opposed to the targeted 70%, and adjustment has been made based on that, just to answer Mr. Mkhize. Thank you.
All right. Okay, please proceed, Dr. K.
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah.
Maybe before you do, Madam Maseti, how long do you still have with us? Because I'd really like to see if we can have a decision by the ELS, even though we might have under engagements in between, but we do need a decision, and we can't make that after you've left.
Chairperson, I'm pushing it really to 5 minutes. I'm running late. Thanks, Chair.
All right. So please, colleagues, if you can respond within 5 minutes, and can we minimize, if we don't mind, members, any follow-ups so we can have a decision. Please proceed.
Yes, Chair. Quickly, on the issue of price elasticity, we've had also a discussion in the past in terms of how do we quantify this impact of prices, because at this point in time, we don't have a framework through which we can quantify this and then use that to reduce the revenue or to adjust the revenue variance. And secondly, what we spoke to in the past was the issue that these prices are based on costs that the regulator deemed prudent and efficient at the time. So it's not ESCOM's own decision to increase prices. So it's based on prudent and efficient costs. But what we'll do, we'll enhance this section, Chair. But at the moment, our framework does not specifically state how we can adjust for price elasticity in terms of what we allow in the revenue variance section. Chair, I'm still, I don't know. And then on the issue of the legal opinion, I will have a discussion with Mr. Moratti in terms of how we can factor that in. The issue of affordability, Chair, yes, we'll look at it, and also in conjunction with the economic impact assessment team, and also when we do the liquidation of the decision, we also look at the affordability issues as well, Chair. The first major, Chair, I don't know. So in our literature review, what we found that the reason that we allow licenses to recover fixed costs is specifically for reasons, for factors that are outside of their control. I would have thought that ESCOM would have applied for a variance because of COVID, because it was outside of their control, but they chose to give it back to customers. And I'm not sure how I would have to deal with that one in terms of if they are voluntarily giving that back to customers. We did allow that in the decision. Chair, so yes, Chair, the issue around the sales, ESCOM's contribution to sales decline is also a difficult one, because at this point we cannot quantify that and use it to adjust sales. So that's why we say, yes, we do know that ESCOM has contributed to the sales decline, but for us, we allow them fixed costs because they will still need to recover. And this is a principle that is applied in other regulatory distribution, regimes to allow fixed costs, and due to the nature of the monopolistic nature of the electricity business, so that they can be allowed to recover fixed costs. If I may stop there, Chair, I hope I haven't missed anything.
Thank you. I saw Mr. Soto's hand was up. Do you want to add something quickly before I move to a decision? Okay, you clearly you've been covered. Are there any other questions that you would want to respond to? Yes, we started with you, Dr. Kate, but any other questions that you'd like to respond to be responded? Mr. Mkiza, your hand is up.
No, I did not get the confirmation that the lowest of the cheapest technology that needs to be deployed is the ones whose values are used instead of the more expensive one when the deployment takes place before the actual capacity of the cheaper technology is fully expended.
Okay. Ms. Makwan, you want to respond to that?
Thanks. I think if I understand Mr. Mkiza's question well, is that after we've assessed the performance and we are making an allocation towards OCGTs, do we consider the fact that some of what caused the need for the OCGTs to be used is because of the reduced output from the coal? So you'd note that in our methodology, we do give provision for that, to say that should the use of the OCGTs above the volumes allowed by the regulator have been used because of poor performance on the coal side, we do compensate them at coal prices. But we do know that with all things being equal, the system operator will observe the merit order in terms of dispatch. And so you would know that by the time that OCGTs are used, it's because there's nothing cheaper to use. But after the fact, we do make that adjustment to say that it is allowed, or rather the additional volumes are allowed at what should have been available. Chair, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Members, I do recognize that perhaps some answers may not necessarily have been provided fully, but I would just implore us to then move to a decision before we lose Madame Massetti. Because again, we still have a second bite here when this matter serves before the ER. So can I just direct us then to a recommendation that at least we as the ELS have been satisfied to be able to recommend, because we are requested to recommend. So members, the decision as a sort is on page 15. It's paragraph 15. It's unnumbered, but it's page 253 of 362. If we can go to that, members, and maybe by show of hands to see whether are we comfortable enough to recommend that this matter be recommended to the Energy Regulator for approval. But if we do need to actually have a workshop, that perhaps we can accommodate a workshop between now and ER to actually have a greater engagement on the issues that the members may still have. So by show of hands, members, can we recommend to the ER for approval, subject to maybe having a workshop if we need to, the enhancement that the members requested?
Chairperson?
Yes, Madam Maseti.
I was going to make a suggestion, the proposal that says that perhaps can we have a workshop and then have a sort of a special ELS on this, Chairperson, because I'm very much uncomfortable and I don't like not to be persuaded before I can abstain. I don't generally abstain because I understand my duty to be that of making sure that we do our due diligence thoroughly without being pressured by time, and also make sure that I can also provide more time for maybe the team and the other members to persuade me in terms of the decision. So I always take that stance. But given the nature of the issues that I've raised today, I believe that at least the submission, because the issues are so substantive, I do believe that perhaps the submission can be enhanced with those substantive issues that are raised, and then maybe just have a workshop, Chairperson, and we can accommodate a special ELS that will take place before the ER. So I was just going to suggest differently, and I'm just providing the reason why I'm suggesting that the workshop comes before we take a decision to recommend to the ER Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. But can I request differently, perhaps, that we have a workshop, and then because this matter has been deliberated here on an open platform, and we also, in terms of the workshop, would allow us to then talk through the numbers, details, that after that we may be able to actually make a decision on a round-robin basis. Would that be acceptable to members? Thank you, Madam Maseti. Mr. Mkize, would you agree with that? With your hand? I see your hand is up, Mr. Mkize. Are you approving?
I would agree after you said after the workshop, we then prepare.
After the workshop.
Yes. Yeah, then we can have we can even have a submission that goes both to a parallel submission if need be.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Chotlo, I see your hand is up.
No, Chair, it is actually in support, but going with a request, Chairperson, given that this matter was for the first time discussed in about 30 minutes or so, can I request from the members that are here, and maybe also from Ms. Mpongos as the member of this subcommittee, for them to send us whatever else that they may need, so that we don't get new issues coming in the workshop, so that we can prepare for that workshop, and then we will respond to that, and then the workshop becomes more efficient if that is possible. With the assistance of Eliezer, we can do that, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Sichotlo. So members, you are requested that as you read further, and Mr. Mkize, you had asked for additional time, that you actually send your comments directly to the team, so that when we have the workshop, that all the issues that members would have raised will then be dealt with at the workshop. Thank you. Thank you, members, for the decision. It is a decision that we've made. So it's going to be a workshop, and then we'll then have a new submission, which will be a parallel submission to both the ER as well as to the workshop, and then we'll be able to then take a decision by round robin. Thank you. Thank you, members, for that. We've dealt with all the substantive items, so I'm not too sure whether we can deal. Oh, at this stage, can I then Thank all the members of the public that may have been following us on the NESA Twitter page, Facebook, as well as the YouTube, NESA YouTube. Thank them for their active participation, and we'll then ask that the live streaming be